Ramsey, just, yeah, it was really, really good. Really, really good. But the thing is I think what you're talking about is attention. Like attention is so important, and anything we can do to garner attention, I think, is of super useful value. And welcome back to the Money, the Mindset, the Mentoring podcast. Today, we've got Sean Duncombe with us, podcastai.com. Sean, we've known each other now for over a year. We've been working together on helping people build out their podcasts. You guys are absolute rock stars where it comes to building out systems and models. And what I want to do today is really talk about the state of the union. I'm going to be honest, this is my 100th podcast. And I had to pick a guest that was really important to me, that meant a lot, because at the beginning, when I started getting into the podcasting space, I was kind of bouncing around from different services and vendors. And I really felt at home when I came into the partnership with Sean and the team. So Sean, thank you so much for being the guest on my 100th podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. Pleasure to be here. And look forward to discussing podcasting and see what's going on out there. And hopefully we can bring some insights to everyone that's listening.
Well, when you look at podcasting, it started off with things like GarageBand and all these other things that people use to kind of get things going. You had to have these like devices. It was always audio only. I mean, podcasting has gone through so much dramatic evolution over the past years, and I think it's on a hockey stick right now. From your perspective, what does the current landscape of podcasting look like?
I think, you nailed it. Podcasting traditionally has always been on audio, and it's gone through a metamorphosis in terms of how it's evolved in the medium. It's gone everything from going to video heavily to being shorts. Like people are doing podcasting in short formats on TikTok now in 2-minute segments. So they're creating these kind of like miniature version of a podcast on there to communicate their message. And it's also evolved into things like being utilized on, platforms, I would say like Instagram, and X as well has started integrating like X components. So you're seeing a wide distribution happening on here on varying length things. People are experimenting with all sorts of different mediums on there. And I think further down the road, you'll see more things in terms of the evolutions of podcasting going into potentially AR, so that's augmented reality. So anyone popping on there, kind of like Apple devices or any kind of those AR glasses, and being able to fully kind of experience podcasting on a different level. I think it's a great segue to talk about how some of the technology has been developed out there in terms of AI has been starting to get implemented into all sorts of things, like from short to long form content. I think it's worth to note and start on the B-roll side of things.
Well, so I want to first, before we get into the technology side, because you and I could talk tech for days, and I think tech is really important. I think it's a good kerosene to dump on a burning fire. My question is podcasting anywhere you went over the past year, it was probably the two biggest words ever used were AI and podcast. The biggest buzzwords. You walk into any marketing room, they're talking about podcasting. You listen to the Grant Cardones, the Alex Hormozis, anybody like that, get on a podcast. Are we still in a podcast boom? Or are we sort of hitting a plateau?
No, I think even the election recently has skyrocketed the interest in podcasting. What people have started to realize, and I think more and more so, like podcast has gone into a renaissance time. Like podcast was slowing down at one point. And then people were favoring to going on YouTube, and they weren't really calling it podcast. But podcast, as I was mentioning, has different mediums. A video is also a podcast when you're doing an interview style. But I think that kind of like evolution and that renaissance in podcasting has created a new attention because of the election. People have realized that people pay attention to podcasts. Like people trust podcasters more so than they trust traditional media. In fact, some recent statistics that have come out have noted that podcasts in terms of trust level is up through the roof into 60-70% of people trusting what they're saying, what they're hearing on podcasts versus hearing it or reading it on traditional media. And I think it's drawn that attention back to people and said, wait a minute, so podcasting, people are listening to it, people are trusting it. Trust factor is a huge element in whether you're looking at it from I want to build my personal brand as a podcaster, maybe a political star, or even in business, right? if you think about business specifically, like what other mediums are there where you can ramble on for an hour essentially about your expertise and people will pay attention to it. And I think, and then at the very core of it, like the conversations are so raw, which is makes it so interesting for people to want to listen to it.
Yeah, I think when you look at podcasting, anybody who wants attention, I feel podcasting is probably one of the best ways to do it because you can win in so many different parts of the game. You've got long form content, that hour long listening moment where people can listen to the whole thing and really get to understand, especially if you're producing really good content that they can learn from, not just some sales pitch. Then they can actually like dive into who you are and actually gain value from you. I mean, the best way to build trust with anybody is give them something of value that they can take and use. It gets proven to be useful. Guess what they're going to do? They want to come back for more. And so the idea of having that ability for people to really ingest that content, long form is great. And I like the idea that you hit is that there's a lot of people that are also using that as short form content. And some people are specifically focusing on, I want a 2-minute podcast. Other people are saying, I'm going to take a 30-minute, 40-minute podcast, and I'm going to recycle that. Grant Cardone does an awesome job of just recycle. I mean, the guys recycle things 16, 17, 18 times. And it's great because you can then see it on all these different platforms that get consumed in different ways. Now, I know there's a lot of attention that's required to build out a podcast, and consumers, there's so many people vying for their attention. What have you noticed in a shift? Has there been a shift in the way that people consume podcasts?
I'd say it's gone more towards video, a lot more. I think it's interesting to note short form. So yes, people do repurpose their long content. Like if we do an hour, you can chop it up into 60 seconds, 30 seconds, and create those viral clips out of it. Kind of on the promotional side. I think when you're looking at like chopping things up specifically, you have to realize that when you're putting things on Instagram, on X, on TikTok, whatever it is, like it's a mobile first experience. So the main purpose of those shorts, I think, in kind of the evolution side of it is that, and how people need to change their psychology around it, is that, yes, you are repurposing, but you're really creating a whole new segment, right? Something of interest, right? And people do not tend to kind of like gravitate off of those platforms too much. And we see that a lot. And so you're almost like building an audience from your long content onto other platforms and kind of gaining following. So you need to be very strategic about what you pick in terms of your shorts to make sure you drive back the message that you want to give out to people.
Yeah, I think that's really important when you're looking at the shorts. The shorts, while they're a hook back to the main content sometimes, a lot of times they are the hook, they are the meat, they are the potatoes. Because that person who's on Instagram, they're not immediately going to go, hey, I'm going to go to your Spotify channel. They're probably going to go to the next Instagram. They're here, they're just swiping. Yeah. And they just watch the next thing, they swipe, they watch the next thing, they swipe, and they're just doom scrolling. Sometimes what they're going to do is if you click it right and they can watch the next short or watch the next short, you can start to build a story for them that they become interested. Yeah. I know there's many times where I've watched a short on something or other and it went and it was like, I had a little hook going to the next one. And then I watched the next short and then it went to a mid-range content. And then I ended up watching a long form content.
So Instagram's great at for stories. So that's a great point, by the way. And I think creating story and an arc to a story for a continuation to get people hooked is really important. You have to think about it in terms of like, what message am I delivering? And are people going to stick around to listen to it, first of all? And so, yeah, Instagram has great ways to use stories for that by chaining different shorts together and creating kind of like a story timeline. So for people to continuously click through it. I think if you look at X, like the things that have really performed well in terms of that platform, people will do threads. So it'll be like one thread leading to another thread, to another thread, to another thread. And the goal of it is to kind of keep people hooked onto your particular account, your content, drive back your expertise in kind of like short form, like kind of like bits and pieces, right? And you kind of want to hit the right notes on there by using the right components of those videos and say, timeline, like, 1 minute, and then you'll do like 2 minutes and like you'll bring all those great points back out. They kind of get like this kind of executive summary of what you were talking about. Now, if you go back to, yes, people do doom scroll through it, but you have to think about it in terms of a marketing exercise. So let's go back to like a simpler example. Like if you think about billboards, right? Why do companies post billboards everywhere? Like oftentimes you're like, is that really being effective out there? Well, yes, it is actually, because if you see it a whole bunch of time, you're going to remember that. And next time you're in a conversation, you say, hey, I remember Bloodline, fight sports, for example, you got a great t-shirt there. So, let's say that's what it is. And you got billboards constantly, and you're seeing this 5 or 6 times repeated. And then you're going to say, oh, I want to learn more, or I want to follow that podcast, Bloodline. I really love the messaging that's coming through, but it does take some training to get people to remember it. So it is that consistency, that quality of content that will eventually drive your viewers back to being loyal listeners / potential, depending on how you spin or how you put things, potential customers and potential, megaphones, essentially ambassadors of your brand that will go and promote your thing for you. And that's the best kind of advertising you can get.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think, whether it's a banner or whether it's a Michael Kors on your shirt, each of those is advertising. And the brand itself, Michael Kors, the value is you have all these people walking around the street wearing Michael Kors. And it's a specific demographic that might wear Michael Kors. And again, I'm not a brand guy for clothes. If it doesn't have my brand on it, I'm not going to wear it. I'm so happy to wear the Bloodline one because we had an amazing event just yesterday for Muay Thai. So I will wear this shirt proudly. It was unbelievable. I give Crew Chris all the credit in the world for that. It was unreal.
Did you get to fight? Did you get your ass kicked?
No, I would have been destroyed. I mean, I watched Santiago just go in there, and he put a clinic on of just patience and just control. It was unbelievable. It was a great fight.
Amazing.
Ramsey it was really, really good. Really, really good. But the thing is I think what you're talking about is attention. Like attention is so important, and anything we can do to garner attention, I think, is of super useful value. And so a lot of people, when they start a podcast, what they realize is it's sometimes hard to get that attention, and then they fail. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about the next element is, why do podcasters fail?
It's like anything in life. You just don't, you give up. Like that's the reason for failure. You're giving up, right? And you're not getting feedback is another component of it. Like you're not really understanding, why are people not listening to your content? Why are people not being engaged with it? I mean, let's use a simple example. If you started a business tomorrow, generally you would build an idea, right? Ideation, same thing in podcasting. You have an idea around what kind of content you want to build. And then you say, okay, well, who is going to listen to this? What kind of audience am I trying to attract? And it's like, does it resonate with that audience? Does my messaging resonate? Does it add value? And that's really important. If your content adds no value to their day, someone's day and time is finite in a single day. So you need to really think strategically, like, okay, in my 5 minutes or in 1 hour that I'm giving them, have they learned something in the process? And that's really, really important. So you want to build your audience. You want to understand your audience. You also want to start gathering some feedback. And you can do that by going on, finding out where your customers, your ideal ICP, your ideal customer target is, and kind of going in and going to Reddit and reading what they're like talking about. What are their pain points, right? And kind of picking up stories and say, like, let's use a crazy wild example. You go on Reddit and you were in marketing, and everyone's pain point is like, I'm spending too much money on AdWords. It's absolutely outrageous. I don't even understand the ROI. It doesn't make any sense, but everyone's doing it, and everyone's telling me I should do it and I should spend on it, and you're dumb if you're not doing it, right? But ultimately, like, maybe that's a great topic to talk about and bring on an expert on there and say, hey, everyone's spending a large portion of their marketing dollars in there. What is going wrong in the process, and why are people not seeing results on there? It could be your landing page. It could be the fact that you are targeting keywords that are highly too competitive. I mean, in short, that's not that important as much as really understanding your audience and kind of like tapping into what their pain points and bring those subjects back. And that's what's going to drive people to want to listen to your podcast, is that you're going out there and listening, and there's like hundreds, thousand people like talking about this subject, and then drive back and then bring some fresh perspective to the issue, essentially.
Yeah, I think if you're not listening to what your audience wants, what's going to happen is your audience is going to go somewhere else. That's number one. Number two is, I think a lot of times when people create the content, they don't even know who their audience is. So they just are like, I've got this product. I want to put it out. I hear this a lot from coaches. They just want to sit, stare at the camera and just like, sham wow, sell the audience on why somebody should sign up for their package. And that's never going to work, because think about it. Are you going to sit down in your car and listen to like a 30-minute commercial? No, of course you're not going to. I mean, everybody can, the audiences for like the true crimes and that sort of thing, it's a very different style of an audience. But if we're talking about people who have a business and they're trying to use podcasts to grow their business, the idea of just sitting there going, I'm going to ShamWow sell you. And look, the ShamWow guy was great. I mean, he sold a lot of those little things. But that was a different time and place than it is today. People really you need to respect your audience's time and always consistently bring them value. But I think the second point that you hit is they quit. Finally they get stuff going, and then they quit. And they quit because they might say it's too expensive in time, too expensive in money, and that sort of thing. Why do you think people quit? What's the driving factor on that?
I think people are just impatient. They're not seeing value return. I think that's the most important. People value, most importantly, their time, even though they tell you they don't. But time is the most valuable commodity you have out there. And I think when you're not seeing results immediately, you give up very easily. It's like going to the gym. If you don't see like the six pack after like 3 months, like you're just like, why am I coming here? And then you just end up giving up on like before you even get anywhere. And I think that's a huge component. It's a psychological factor of there. And it's kind of this expectation in society that we're going to just win right away. And if I don't win right away, I need to move on to something else. But like, I mean, it's like any skill, you need to hone your skill in order to get good at it. And then you need to also have a plan, most importantly. I think people just don't have a plan when they go into building podcasts. Yeah. They're just blindly posting things. They're not thinking about, they're not doing that market research. They're not understanding their customers. They're not really thinking like this is a business, but it is a business building a podcast. Like you're building an audience, whether you're thinking about being like an independent podcaster out there and you're saying like, I want to build that audience so my goal is to make money from ads. Well, to get there, you have to get thousands of listens in there. How do you build an audience that's loyal enough to listen to you every week? Well, you need to have a plan behind it. And that's like the majority of people why they fail. Now, there's obviously some subcomponents that, some skills can be learned, like through soft skills. You definitely have to have the personality. The equipment really matters as well. Like, I think people, if you think about like, I'm listening to you, like if the voice quality, your microphone, like that element, like that interactive kind of like experience, that holistic experience that you get from podcasting isn't perfect, you get a lot of people that drop off like very quickly. So you need to think about it as a whole package. But yeah, ultimately it's just people giving up because they're not seeing immediate results.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And we see that in the gym all the time. I mean, look, it's February right now. In January, the gyms are full. In February, the gym's empty. And because all those people who said they were going to do it fall off the map. And I think in any industry, there's always a Pareto principle. There's always an 80-20, where 20% will do what the 80% thought they could. And really of that 20%, it's usually about 2% are really successful. Mm-hmm. And the other ones are some degree of success. And I think when people get into podcasting, the lens of I'm going to do one thing and I'm going to get a result the next day, it takes time. It takes time. Look, we're on episode 100 and we now are at about 20,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. So it's just starting to grow. We're just starting to get some really good audience interaction. But that first year of running the podcast, a lot of the wins didn't come necessarily out of the podcast itself. They came out of the peripheral things that happened because we had the podcast. And so because we had the podcast and people could consume the content, on whatever platform they wanted to, it was great. But I think there was a lot of ancillary benefits that we got out of it. And a lot of people don't realize that happens. I spoke on so many stages because I had a podcast, because they were able to watch me on there. Now, one thing you brought up earlier was also that, when people look at, they don't realize that when you get 400 people watching one of your things, like you might say it's only 400 people. Well, we just did Bloodline Fight Sports, where we had a venue that had 1,000 people in the venue. You might have a short that 1,000 people watch your short. We had to plan and plan and plan to make that event come together. And you have one short that 1,000 people watch it. We've got one short that we had 110,000 people watch. And you think about that, it's a very interesting in the reach that you can get from creating that kind of content.
I think if you want to rationalize this, like imagine packing 1,000 people into a room that pay attention to you for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, doesn't matter. 1,000 people are listening to you. Imagine visualizing 1,000 people in a room. That is crazy. I mean, to get that amount of people to jam pack a room, to do live events and stuff, that amount of efforts and capital you have to invest into that is significant compared to, generating a video and doing some research and making an interesting topic and driving a 1,000 potential customers or 1,000 potential viewers, whatever your goal is in podcasting, right? That's amazing. That's simply phenomenal. And then ultimately, it's like, if you think about out of 1,000, if my goal is to sell you peanuts, let's say I'm a peanut seller, right? My goal is to promote my peanut brand. If I can get 1,000 people through my shop door and I'm selling only peanuts, I would be like through the roof happy as a business owner of foot traffic. 1,000. No business, brick and mortar, majority do not get 1,000 people walking through the door with an opportunity to sell that peanut bag, right? So it's a great way to get engaged listeners and then get in front of people. But it's important to kind of like, I think the most difficult part of it is the feedback portion, because often people don't post comments. So you have to think about a little bit outside the box when you're thinking about, how to get feedback on there.
I think you right there is really important. Think about yourself. You're on Instagram, you're on whatever, you're watching a YouTube video. How often are you commenting on the YouTube video? For me, never. I will never comment on a YouTube video. And so if I'm judging the success of a video by something that I never do, then that's weird. What it should be is judging it by, number one, is the number of the views, how long the people are staying watching it. And then when you go to events, like when I was at the Bloodline event, the amount of people who come up and say, hey, I listened to this episode. I really loved your episode here. I really loved your episode here. That right there is like, okay, I'm getting that engagement. And I think attention is one thing and conversion is another.
Yeah. You'll see if YouTube in terms of comments is generally like a slugfest. Like nobody comments on there. It's not because nobody likes you or no one wants to comment on there. Even the people who get a lot of following, like 1 million, all their comments are just superfluous. It's like, great job, I love that video, but it's like not actually helpful, right? It's just like, it's useless. I mean, like thumbs up, thumbs down, what does that mean, right? I think if you really want to engage with communities, like you go on platforms, first of all, you talk about your expertise, you show a sample of people, whether it's in a short format, you're going to get a lot more engagement from things like creating threads on X. You need to combine it with traditional text, grow an audience on there on X. What I've seen is like, write some crazy out of the box things, right? And be like, you can say AdWords is dead. Like it is a dead business. You're an idiot if you're spending any money on AdWords. Your conversion rate is going to be horrendous. And you think that it's going to make you money because you see a couple ticks up, but like ultimately it's a terrible way. Like if you gonna think that way in terms of like approaching it from a, what is out there in terms of messaging? Well, how can I drive back people and how can I grab their attention in terms of responding? I think a great way to think about it is like ask questions. Humans are really inherently driven towards answering questions. Drive a question, but don't also throw things that are just outrageous that people want to like kind of respond to. And I mean, like, don't go like, down rabbit hole of like writing completely crazy stuff, but write things that people will have to think about and be like, disagree with you. Disagreement and debate is what drives conversations. And then you'll start really kind of getting into the nitty gritty of things, right? Whether you're in a podcasting fashion, and then you're doing a short version, and then you're putting on TikTok, you'll start driving conversations because you're saying things that are driving conversation. Same thing in written words, right? Like if you do an expose, you're writing things like, in 2025, like SaaS is dead, right? Like, for example, like somebody made that comment and it drove like insane amount of replies on there. And that's really valuable in terms of getting insights into what's going on there. So.
Yeah, and again, it goes down to whatever the platform. When you talk about X, the way people engage X is going to be very different than the way they engage Spotify or the way they engage Apple, or not Apple, or the way they engage YouTube. And I think each of the different platforms going to have their own ways. I mean, does anybody ever comment on like? Well, I read this thing on it was Podcaster News, and it was a post that talked about how all these different platforms. It was produced by, who was it? It was produced by, let me grab this. It was so good. They talked about all these different platforms that tried to go out and create this audience interactivity for podcasts where people would go out, and there was 24 platforms that died last year, in the last year, basically that, that went out and tried to create these engagement style podcast platforms, and they just died because that engagement would never happen. Now, when you look on X and Twitter or X or Instagram, they're very high engagement. What do you think the difference is between those platforms and the other ones that aren't successful?
In terms of distribution platforms, you mean? Like,
yeah.
I guess, okay, let's use TikTok, for example. I think it's ultimately their algorithm that drives people. It's because it's actually chaining. They have constructed entertainment in a box, essentially. It is one thing after another. The algorithm is constantly pumping things that are driven towards like keeping you on a platform and driving success. If you look at platforms that are doing it from a non-linear timeline and kind of like bombarding you with random content, like they're not as successful. I think YouTube has learned that quickly over the course of a period of time. Like when they start recommending content to you, they're looking at like the type of content you're watching, the length, and a bunch of other factors. And the aim is to essentially just have you like chain look at stuff, right? So if I'm watching something about video games, it's going to show me another one, and then it's going to kind of go into this like almost tree branch. And I think that's part of the recipe of success is creating entertainment and thinking about how do I create a linear storyline of entertainment in a box, essentially. And that's the difference between a platform that succeed in this, and X does the same thing, except it's all comments, right? But it's like, if you click on something, the algorithm's like, oh, you must like this type of content. I want to show you more. And it's like, whether the most interesting thing is that people will be like, why am I being shown this like content? It's like, it's making me furious, but you're like stuck on that device and you're like typing like a ninja warrior, like weekend warrior typer. And then you're just replying to all this stuff. Guess what? They've achieved their goal of keeping you engaged on the platform, whether you think the algorithm has done a poor job, but ultimately they've achieved their goal because you're still on there. You're still replying. You're still viewing. You're still outraged, right? I think, and these platforms do a great job in terms of like really keeping you engaged in things. And I think we just as humans want to be outraged at stuff.
Well, I mean, everybody's always, it's the weather's too hot, the weather's too cold, the weather's not warm enough, the weather's too humid, the weather's too dry. And that's very much the human condition for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think that drives them. I mean, I look at mine, if I went onto any of these right now on the phone, it would be jujitsu, 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 jujitsu. And it knows that, I'm going to be, the only thing I engage with is on jujitsu. So it always just keeps on throwing me up jujitsu stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, definitely. And anyways, like it's really fascinating because I mean, like if you think about the type of content on TV or Netflix that works well, it's like drama, shooters, murder. Yep. Like what is the best performing podcast genre out there? True crime, right? So why? Because it's like exciting and it's like something has happened and you're being drawn into this dramatic story of murder and like intrigue, and it's taking you into this kind of experience box, right? And if you think about podcasting, you're creating an experience, an auditory or video experience for people to be engaged and glued towards, and that they're going to be, and it's taking them outside of their day-to-day 9-to-5 job, outside of their, comfort levels and kind of like, and that's where really drives excitement and trying to subscribe and kind of and gaining engagement. And I was saying, you should start a true crime podcast tomorrow. You can do it in business as well. That's why it's driving back to the fact that throw on some things that are contrarians, right? Contrarian opinions. Like, why do you have a contrary opinion? Like, challenge people. Like, there, you're taking people out, and you're engaging them into a new type of world of education, which will drive people to comment on all this other stuff.
Now, I want to dovetail back to what we were talking about at the beginning, which was tech, and the tech from the very beginning of podcasting to the tech that people are using today is dramatically different. And so I want to talk a little bit about, we said there's two major buzzwords of 2024. They're probably still, I think, the dominant buzzwords of 2025, which is podcasting and AI. So let's talk a little bit about AI's role in podcasting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, okay, so there's a cohort of people that still hate AI. Okay, so there's podcasters out there that are like, I don't want anything to do with AI. I love spending time writing everything by hand. I love using Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere, and then they're just refused, right? And then there was a lot of that in 2024. Okay, and so in the evolution to 2025. I think there were some early adopters in 2024 that said, hey, wait a minute, maybe I should use AI for something, right? Maybe there's some use for it. Like, maybe I'm not eliminating jobs. Maybe I'm just making myself more efficient in the process. And if I don't start using it, and then this is kind of a theme that went into 2025, if I don't start using it, I'm going to start falling behind, right? And I'm not going to have the same access to these tools. And so now in 2025, you get a little less of people being like haters, but there's still a whole bunch of people that think it's like destroying creativity. And I would challenge that, because AI, in terms of the tools that are out there, I mean, if you think about, okay, let's use a component. Okay, who wants to do any post-production, right? Nobody. And by post-production, I mean like show notes. Like, who wants to write a bunch of stuff? Like, you have to write stuff. You have to write descriptions. You have to write titles. And then, like, why do they matter? Because like the algorithm picks up words, right? Like, Google is an algorithmic like word machine, right? If you don't write the right words, you're never going to get discovery on YouTube, on TikTok, nothing like that. So you need that stuff written. Like, do you really want to spend 2 hours writing this stuff? Some people are still like, yeah, I'm going to write like some stuff. And I'm like, oh, it's working. I'm like, is it really working? Or have you really kind of gained a niche and the audience and no one really cares what you wrote, right? So I think from the aspect of post-production is really kind of interesting. Show notes creation. That's an aspect that was like the first, let's call it the first door that people are like, okay, it's fine. I don't want to write any of this stuff. Okay, yeah, chapters, all this stuff. Yeah, people can click. I see the interactability, whatever. It's fine. I think that was the first entry point was that. And then the next one was like, okay, now you start delving into like creativity a little bit, right? When you think about like, let's go into promotion meaning like, creating viral clips like TikTok. A lot of people would say, well, it requires a lot of creativity to find those hooks, right? The AI can't possibly achieve that. But well, the way like the evolution of AI has happened now is that initially it was pretty rudimentary. It would just go and use like an LLM, meaning LLM is a large language model. For those who don't understand, all it does is basically looks through your transcript, which is the words that are spoken, and then tries to look for hooks. That's what it does, right? And it's like a machine, an intelligent machine, trying to determine what hooks should be found in there. So that was kind of phase one of viral clips. And people were like, oh, it's generating like so-and-so, and then there's like tools out there like Opus and all this stuff. Like, it was kind of crap, like at some points, to be honest. Like, and people were like, it's too short, too long. I don't like it. And finally they were doing all this editing and people were like, I'm just going to drop off and go back to the old fashioned, right, of it. But I think as you see the evolution of it, what's happened now is that the LLM is now starting to learn from other podcasts and your own podcast success. And it's actually there to craft better. And that's the evolution of viral clips, right? And it's like, it's what AI is great at is basically interpreting and understanding data, right? So if you give it a bunch of data and say, here's all the most successful podcast clips I've had, please help me build better ones in the future. And that's what's happening. And so you're creating what's in essence, if you're looking at the word LLM, you're creating what's called an SLM, which is a small language model. You're creating an individualized database of information that's going to be looking at how do I perform better for your viral clips? And that's the evolution of AI. And then that is also saving you inherently significant amounts of time, because no one has time to go and like look through data dumps of stuff. And ultimately we suck at it as humans. We're like, this one performed. And you're kind of guessing, you're throwing things at a dartboard.
Well, I think a lot of times when we as humans look at the data, we look through the lens of our emotions. And so we come with a preconceived understanding of we're looking for the things we want to see, not looking for the things that are self-evident.
Yeah.
And so if we can look at it in the way that a computation looks at it, the computer's just going to say, this is just the facts. And so when I pull out data, a lot of times sales calls, we'll pull out data from a sales call and we'll analyze it and say, did we achieve our objective? Well, we didn't. I do peer review calls for coaching. I'll pull that out. The LLM will say, here's a balanced scorecard of what you did based on my SLM is what you call it, which is the small language model interpretation of what that meeting looks like, and put that together. So AI can do a lot. In the podcasting space, what I find AI so super exciting is that it can take all of these mundane tasks, shorten them up, and shore them up so that they can go out and stuff can get done quickly. Guys, right now we are recording this podcast. We'll probably be done about 10 o'clock. This podcast is going to be released at noon. And it's going to be fully cut out. All the shorts are going to be done. Everything's going to be ready to go. And it's going to be released today at noon. That's super exciting. Without AI, there's no way we could have done that. No way. It's going to be fully transcribed, have all the little bits together, and it's boom, it's going to be out today. Because today is the 100th podcast that we're releasing. So we just want to show the speed in which things can happen. And if you look at all the content that's going to come out around it, it's all going to go bam, 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 bam. That's saving time. And all the while, I still have 4 other podcasts that I released today. I have a podcast that's on Muay Thai kickboxing. It's called Canadian Muay Thai Kickboxing Podcast. Just look it up. I've got a grappling news podcast. I've got a commercial real estate podcast, and I have my mortgage insights podcast. So I have 4 other podcasts that we just released an episode today. In fact, we do that every single day. Do you know how I do all of that? The only way I can do that is because of AI. And that's how you garner a lot of attention.
100%. So, yeah. Save yourself the time. Do creative stuff. Talk on podcasts. Do less of the hard work, really, in essence. So that's what AI's enablement. It's like, a lot of people actually, go back to our earlier conversation. Like, why do people drop off? It's too much time commitment. Well, AI saves you time. Okay?
Absolutely.
So if you leverage AI properly, you are now not spending all this time with editing, post-production, viral clips. You're generating tons and tons of content a very short period of time, and then you're done in like an hour or 20 minutes, right? So it used to take like 3 hours, 4 hours if you were, a whole day. Sometimes you would spend 8 hours editing stuff. Like, it would be crazy. So of course people would drop off from there. It's too much time. You'd have to be so dedicated. So the drop off rate was exponential. I mean, so ultimately the AI will just enable you to, focus on your craft, focus on your skills, focus on what you're good on as a human, which is presenting information, right? So, and then let AI do the rest to help you get to where you want to get, whatever your objective is,
Yeah, I love it. And the thing is AI, is it going to replace humans? Maybe in certain situations.
Am I an AI is the question?
Yeah, like this, we could not be real. Like, we're probably just,
So
AI versions of ourselves.
I joke, but like in a year's time, it could very well possible you're going to be interviewing my AI.
Well, I mean, we already have episodes that are released. Again, we talk about those 4 other podcasts. They're completely synthetic podcasts. And so my mortgage one, for example, it's called the Ontario Real Estate and Mortgage Insights podcast. I actually listened to that podcast. It's weird. People think it's weird that I'm listening to my own voice, but I listen to it because it's got some really good content. It's fully synthetic. There's no part of me that's produced it other than choosing the sources of data to curate it, to put it together, to package and put it back out through an interpretive lens of what I believe is important. And then I can go and I can listen to that podcast, and it's like maybe like 5, 10, 15 minutes podcast long, or minutes long for that podcast. And it's got all the data I need to keep informed on the market. So you can create a podcast solely for the purposes of giving you the information that you're looking for using an AI generated tool that gets you attention, but also give you the knowledge in that space to keep you apprised of what's important. That's cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Or you can do a podcast like my grappling news podcast, where again, it's using the same kind of thing, keeps me apprised of what's going on in jiu-jitsu, but I do it in the form of rhyme. So you can listen to the podcast. It's amazing. It's AI rhyming, and it actually does a really good job. It'll do, I think it's like a 10 or 15 minute podcast, all done in rhyming talking about Gordon Ryan, talking about Michael Musumeci. That's how I found out that John Danaher might be considering retiring from coaching athletes. And I didn't know that. I knew that from my podcast.
So
that's cool.
Very interesting fact you mentioned there, Steve, is just to kind of close it off here real quick. But those synthetic podcasts are being generated. If you think about going back to the aspect of time, how much time do you spend on your phone reading through 5 or 6 different newspapers looking for information? And then half of it is not even relevant to what you want to understand, right? So creating kind of these, like, let's call them personal pods with informations that are being gathered, a very specific subject, it's cutting you like significant amount of time finding the info. And not only that, is like you can really fine tune the stuff. I mean, you could create like kids stories. You don't have time to tell your kids story. You can get the thing to do a kid's story 5 minutes every day in your own voice if you wanted to, and it just play to your kids. I mean, or in someone else's voice, right? And you can have a storytelling aspect. Are you into stocks? Well, guess what? Are you the expert at breaking down all of the reports and all the financials and going through spreadsheets? No. Well, but the system will do it for you, and it'll summarize it for you in 5 minutes, and it'll tell you, the pros and cons, and to do a complete deep analysis of like what the performance, whether you should invest or not. Like those are great tools from a various aspect, right? Whether you're looking at from a personal growth investment or in marketing, or I want to learn more about jiu-jitsu or learn more about this subject. Like all this stuff will compile on all the data that you want, and then you can listen to it in your car for 5 minutes, and you'll be like an expert every day. You'll know everything, and then
absolutely.
You won't have.
I like that idea, because not only is the audience of many important, but the audience of one is important. And if it speaks to you and you can listen to it, I can guarantee somebody else will want to listen to it too.
Yeah. Just to throw it out, so we did build a podcast called the AI News. It is ranking number, I know it's crazy, but number 3 in Pakistan. I don't know why. So it's crazy.
That's amazing. Yeah.
But it is a completely synthetic podcast. It's like 5 minutes. It is like completely based on this premise of like gathering news. It is 100% listenable. It does not freak people out. The completion rate is 85% listen. That is crazy on Apple. Very, very high listener rate. We have about 1,000 subscribers. We launched 2 months ago. We do 0 promotion on this thing. And all it's doing, it's just doing exactly that mechanism. It's gathering news from people that are interested in these kind of like in AI news, right? And it's kind of compelling it into short format, like summary. That's what people want to listen to. And it's driving that engagement. So if you're thinking about using it as a supplementary piece to your podcast to build expertise and say, hey, I want to build the best, let's use real estate. I want to be like #1 broker out there. Let's do a whole podcast around your area. Do a whole podcast around your region, right? And be like, become the expert. And people are like, wow, this guy knows, like, Josie sold a house and this is what's happening in this neighborhood, new development. Like, that's super interesting if you're looking for micro-targeted information. And you just, and some of this information is so sparsely, like through all these websites that you have to like, fumble through. The system will just build it for you and be like, it's like intelligence essentially for you.
Yep.
From a business perspective.
I mean, at the end of the day, when one of the public figures goes up and stands and talks on CNN or whatever, there's a teleprompter, and that teleprompters give them exactly what they need, because they have a whole team that's working behind them to give them the best data. AI is doing the same thing. Dude, yeah, Sean, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. 100th podcast, guys. So happy to have Sean here. Beginning of the journey and continuation of the journey going forward. My man, thank you so much. I'm excited for what's going to happen over this next year. It's going to be an amazing year.
Yeah, so am I. I think there's a lot to look forward to. Thanks for having me, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And guys, thank you for joining us. The Money Mindset Mentoring Podcast. We'll see you in the next 100.